Hey there, romance nerds! Welcome to another episode of Raging Romantics. I'm Jen.
I'm Jackie, and we are proud to have you. We are librarians at Northern Onondaga Public Library, and we are also romance nerds. Now, if you're wondering what this podcast is about, wait for it. Romance! Specifically, the romance genre of books. We are going to be talking about anything and everything having to do with romance. This could be bad heroines, good heroes.
Swoon-worthy endings, snappy dialogue.
Happily ever after. The genre, the tropes, anything and everything.
So with that being said, sometimes our material will be a little too sensitive for younger readers. If you feel the need to wait until they go to bed, we will be here for you.
We would also like to issue just a general trigger warning for some of the things that we do talk about. We will always try to issue specific trigger warnings for each episode so that you know what you're getting into. Now, without further ado, are you ready, Jen?
Oh, I've been ready, Jackie.
All right.
Let's rage!
Hey, Jackie.
What?
Why did the vampire break up with her boyfriend?
Why?
Because he wasn't her type.
Oh, God. Well, that's an excellent introduction into our topic for this month.
Yeah, what's our topic?
Well, it's spooky season. It's
Our
the best
favorite season.
Best season of all. So, you guys have probably guessed what we're talking about.
Vampires!
I want to suck your blood.
Vampires might suck, but I promise you this podcast won't.
Oh, God. They're going to keep
I'm
coming,
full of
folks.
these!
This is terrible.
The fate of our conversation's at stake. Oh, God. So, Jackie, to make me shut up before I come up with anything worse.
Yes.
You're a crazy history major.
Yeah.
I meant that in a different order, or did I?
No, I'm a crazy history major.
So I know lots about vampires. Fun fact, in order to really torture my high school teachers, I would pretend to like Twilight and write really long.
Pretend.
I actually really genuinely hated Twilight, and I hated this teacher. So I wrote history papers about vampires that would end with me really lavishing praise on Twilight. And all of my projects would end with like an 8-page PowerPoint of Edward Cullen shirtless, glistening in the sun, and I really hated...
You're spoiling things.
Oh, no, I
Spoiler.
am. Yeah, so the point is, Jackie, do you want to give us a little overview of vampires before we even get started?
All right, so a vampire, for those of you who have been living in a coffin this whole time.
Underground, in
in a grave. A vampire is an immortal being who drinks blood to sustain life. I guess that's the best description of a vampire you can get. Now, vampires are a folkloric character. Pretty much every single culture around the world has some sort of vampire. They weren't called vampires, however, until the 1700s. That was when the word first really came into being. Nobody really knows where the word vampire, quote unquote, came from. So we won't get into that argument. But the first use of the word vampire in relation to literature was in 1734-ish, 1732. There were a couple poems about, these creatures coming into a maiden's bedroom to suck her blood. Okay, 1748, it was The Vampire by Heinrich August Ossenfelder. Like my German accent there?
It's beautiful.
Thank
I love
you.
it.
Oh, it was a poem. It had very strong erotic overtones, and it was about a man whose love is rejected by a respectable and pious maiden. And so the vampire, the creature, threatens to pay her a nightly visit, drink her blood by giving her the seductive kiss of the vampire, and thus prove to her that his teaching as a vampire is better than her mother's Christianity.
I'm pretty sure I've had messages on Tinder like that.
Slide into your DMs, girl.
Slide into my coffin.
Oh, God. It went there.
It's nice that time doesn't change much.
And then throughout the rest of the 1700s, there were more instances of vampire literature, and they were all really erotic and really romantic, surprisingly. And then, of course, Dracula happened.
I mean, I guess on reflection, vampires aren't that scary.
No, so they're meant to be scary.
But reflection.
Oh, God. I didn't even get it. I didn't pick it up. Oh, bless my heart.
Should that bring us right into modern vampires, or do you...
Well, I do just want to say, Dracula had nothing to do with vampires until Bram Stoker wrote about him. And that was when we start seeing this idea of kind of like a fated pairing. So, and Dracula, they were kind of fated to meet. She was fated to die with him. I have all literature people screaming at me if they're listening to this right now. But it was kind of the first instance of like a fated vampire, really infamous vampire with this cult-like following. And then the rest of the late 19th century happened. Nothing really exciting happened with vampires. Early 19th century, or early 20th century, nothing really exciting happened. Sci-fi, so science fiction, kind of started really rolling around, and that's when you start see vampires as monsters again. And then Anne Rice happened.
Oh, yeah. She was big, right?
1974?
A little bit before our time, to be honest.
1976.
But
yeah.
I've read her, and
Yeah.
I think you have too, right?
Interview with a Vampire came out in 1976. I love the movie. Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise.
That feels like a disclaimer before you talk about the book.
Oh. I love the movie. But I also love the book.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to be like, the book was awful.
No.
The book sucked.
The book is always better. Always. Except in the case of Twilight. They're just both...
Oh, hey, no spoilers!
Spoiler alert.
When we get to Twilight, because
yeah.
you can't talk about vampires and not talk about Twilight, unfortunately.
Exactly. We'll get there, guys. Interview with a Vampire came out in 1976, and it really started turning the tide of how the public at large really viewed vampires. So, like I said, science fiction, the birth of science fiction in the early 20th century, really introduced the vampire as a monster and this creature that everybody should fear again. And then with Anne Rice, you get the idea of the vampire as this sympathetic creature.
Okay.
So he starts becoming this really moralistic character who's questioning his, and you notice I keep using him as a pronoun.
Hey, look at that.
Yeah, we'll get to that, guys.
But we know what we're doing.
Maybe. Sometimes. So you have the vampire who's questioning his being, who's questioning his reality. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? Why do I have to kill people? Why do I have to suck blood? And they're questioning all these bad things that they're doing, and it makes the reader really feel bad for Louis and Lestat, who are the main characters in this book. And it really kind of made the readers more invested in vampires. And then the early 2000s happened.
Oh boy, what happened there?
There was a very sad day, September 11th, 2001. Really, actually, this might come as a surprise for some people, had an influence on paranormal romance.
Really?
It did.
9/11 has a connection to vampires.
It did.
I can't wait to hear about it.
So, post 9/11, completely understandably, a lot of people turned to fiction for escapism. And as we said in our last episode or two, romance is pretty much escapism. That is its foundational core value, I want to say. And so post 9/11, a lot of readers, I won't generalize by saying people, a lot of readers turned to romance for escape, but they wanted to see a hero that could rescue them. So they were looking for this kind of supernatural entity, this godlike being who was strong, who was rich, maybe not rich, but most definitely strong.
Definitely rich.
Definitely
Especially
rich.
after, actually they found that too with the recession.
Oh, with the recession,
like
yeah.
millionaire and billionaire fiction has shot up.
Yeah, for sure. Who knew everything, who had been through multiple, like through battles, through wars, through plagues, through famines, all of this bad stuff before, and came out the other side still just as strong. And that was when we really started seeing vampire romances and paranormal romances too, but especially vampire, werewolves, that sort of thing, start to rise. We had authors like
Start to Rise, huh?
Start to Rise. Hey, that was a good one. I didn't even plan that one, guys. So we had Christine Feehan, we have Sherilyn Kenyon, we have Sookie Stackhouse. Anne Rice continues to publish.
Katie McAllister.
There are literally
Christine
so many.
Warren, Lynn Veal. Like,
Yeah.
we could have a good 30 minutes of just listing vampire authors.
And then Twilight happened.
Twilight. Sounds like it was a real pain in the neck.
Oh, save me, please.
But before we get into Twilight,
Yeah.
I think really we need to discuss the subject at hand. Why are they actually sexy? What is the appeal of this bloodsucker?
Well, so, as the person obsessed with serial killers, we all know that stabbing is a euphemism for penetrative sex.
Really?
Yeah.
But it's a serial killer thing?
Well, just killing in general, stabbing.
Ugh.
So sinking
This is
fangs,
what I need to escape from.
the sinking of the fangs into somebody's flesh is literally a euphemism, a metaphor for penetration.
That never occurred to me. That's really interesting.
That's like the first thing that pops in my brain. Okay, why do you think vampires are sexy?
I think there is a big component of them that is like this forbidden love, this bad boy, this really dangerous predator. And as much as I hate to call anything back to Nicholas Sparks and his theory that romance is about taming a man, this is the one time he's right. When really you want to tame that vampire, this really dangerous, scary being, into a creature that exists solely for you and lives for you. And maybe he fought against it a little bit, but in all of the centuries of his life, you are the shining light. You are the way out of the darkness. He can't live without you.
She's staring very fiercely into my eyes.
Because I really believe this.
Fiercely.
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 I'm practicing my vampire dub.
Oh, I like it. No,
See, it works. My feminist card is being revoked right now, but there is something very attractive about that. As much as I hate it, Nicholas Sparks will never be anything positive in my mouth again. But there is definitely some truth to that particular statement, I think, with vampires especially.
I mean, it's the ultimate need.
Yeah.
Literally can't live without you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks to Jackie for that line.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. We would not have come up with that on our own. I do agree. I think that point about the ultimate need is one of the most sexy things. Also, when talking about feminine wiles.
I can't pronounce stuff, guys. I'm really sorry in advance.
Wiles. The idea of the heroine turning this creature, this predator, into something else. So she is literally taking the most dangerous predator, the top of the apex, right? The apex of the food chain. That's the same thing.
And turn it into a guard dog, really.
Yeah. So a wolf in sheep's clothing, pretty much, I think is how one podcast described it that I listened to. And the idea of domestication is something that's interesting to talk about, and it goes into the idea of why vampires are so often portrayed as male. I think because, and all the feminists in the back are standing up saying, no! I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I am too. This doesn't give us any pleasure to say this.
Yeah. It definitely appeals to a very specific part of the psyche where a woman, a female, the female character, really takes something and it appeals to the idea of feminine wiles, like we said, where she has domestication, she has the power of the family, she has this very female virtue about her where she's able to take this very scary predator, like I said, and turn him with the power of her love and other parts of her body into something.
Obviously, just the neck part.
Just the neck, and
neck.
just the lifeblood, and turn him into something else completely.
So I would like to add 2 points to that because I do agree absolutely.
Okay.
I'm very sorry. Sorry, Gloria. I don't like this about myself. I will be discussing this in therapy one day. But I think to that point about really wanting the predator to fall in love with you, I think that speaks to a lot of fear we have in real life and in society, where usually you're not going to get the predator to fall in love with you in real life.
Good point.
I mean, serial killers don't have those kind of emotions. Real dangerous people do not have that within them. In real life, you're going to get killed.
Yeah. So
I do think there is something to it that in fiction, you can save yourself in a way that's not physical. That's not necessarily you're fighting him. You're not out tricking him. You're such a terrific human being or a great person or something about you, like inner you, saves you. I think that is very interesting to think about.
Well, that's an interesting point, yeah.
And then I think the second point, I read a really interesting comment from a sexologist about vampires. And she describes that the vampire symbolizes the masculine. With male vampires, denied masculinity is allowed to come forth. That, again, we can't necessarily trust in real life. But many women have submissive fantasies, but cultural attitudes that frown upon non-traditional sexual activities can shame women into not expressing them. But vampire romances provide a safe outlet for these types of fantasies.
Same reason BDSM and 50
Shades
Shades
is
got
great.
so popular.
Exactly.
Because, and I actually even asked my brother-in-law, because he caught me taking notes on this, and he's like, why are you writing about vampires? I was like, well, A, they're awesome, and B, we want to know why people think vampires are sexy. And he said, well, it's forbidden fantasy. It's the ability to express something deep down inside that you wouldn't be able to express otherwise.
And in a very safe way.
Yes. We talked about that in the last couple episodes, too. How romance allows you to experience something that you wouldn't necessarily experience in real life. And you can judge your own reactions to it.
Exactly. The same way with horror movies. People love it just to see what they would do,
Say
how they
horror
feel.
again.
Horror.
Horror. The horror!
There's some horror in this house.
Oh, God. Don't get us copyrighted.
But I do think there's something to having safe outlets for these very human emotions that maybe we don't like to acknowledge as a society. We're very, very...
Puritanical.
Thank you. Before I could try to say that word, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And I think also because they're not neatly packaged feelings. I think it's very easy to mock those feelings.
Oh, for sure.
And I think it's very easy to dismiss those feelings. So often it's much safer to read about these things in a vampire book as opposed to, I don't know, I definitely would not talk about this. Yeah. Like, you're not going to get this kind of emotion or outlet with Nicholas Sparks.
I mean, listen, I cry every time I read Nicholas Sparks, but that's because he kills the dog every time.
Oh, see, the spark faded for me a long time ago.
But, but going into, like, how vampire romances, and just paranormal in general, I guess, allow you to experience and express something, it's kind of, with vampire and paranormal romances, there's, like, no boundaries. You can literally express pretty much anything and make it believable, I guess, within the realms of
That's
fiction.
True. Yeah.
So, like, a vampire who sparkles in the sun and can fly and can read minds and can control emotions. Sure.
Why not?
Why not?
Let's go for
Right.
it. But you're really exploring, I think, the feeling that all of that brings you of, like, Edward Cullen, the sparkly vampire who's secretly the mountain lion who's going to rip you to shreds.
And wants to suck your blood.
Is actually very safe to handle.
And also, he himself is very good at, like, that is such good grammar. He is very good at holding himself back. Just the vampire in general, for the most part. The idea of that control.
Yeah.
Where, so I talked about with Anne Rice, you get the idea of the vampire as wanting to control himself, feeling very questionable about himself. And it's kind of the idea that you can trust, almost, except the crazy ones, you can trust that they are holding themselves back. They don't want to do this because they're worried that they are going to kill you, that they are going to suck your blood, and that they're going to turn you into a vampire, and they don't want to do that.
For something that's not human, I think they think about being human and how to humanize themselves.
They
and
miss
what
their
that
humanity
means more than, like, actual humans do.
Yeah. It's almost like they have nothing to lose, so they're afraid of losing everything without sounding completely trite.
Yeah. And then I think we've talked about taboo. We've talked about, like, the bad boys and really wanting to, like, seduce the predator. But I think just internally there's something about us as humans that are really fascinated by the idea of vampires. Jackie mentioned that just about every single culture, every single religion, myth, place, whatever, has some version of a vampire in their stories. And I think that makes a lot of sense when you consider how bodies decompose.
Yeah.
And if you consider 2,000, 3,000 years ago, yes, they were smart people, but they just did not have the science that we have now. And you see a body suddenly grow hair, or the gums recede, or the nails come out, or there's all these groans and fluids coming.
And their stomachs are getting larger. They appear to have fluid trickling out of their orifices.
And hey, there's some sheep missing. I mean, why not? It's the Walking Dead, come to steal our livestock and women.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's very telling that even 3,000, 2,000, a gazillion years later, we've still managed to fit that myth and that kind of fascination into our own society. And we found a way to rework it that it's still useful to us.
Yeah. Back then it was a way to rationalize the natural world because they couldn't, they didn't have the ability to, within their own It was their way of rationalizing it.
Exactly.
And our way of rationalizing it now is it's how we can experience and express.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's a good way.
I like that.
Thank you.
Good job, Jackie.
Thank you.
I think our fears in general, I mean,
dying.
Yeah, dying's scary.
Everybody's
I think
afraid
that's
of
very
dying.
understated of me to say. I know, real controversial. People don't
Yeah.
want to die. It's a literal pause on death.
It is. So, I mean, we'll talk about it in our next episode, but Jen reread some Christine Feehan.
Yeah.
Do you want to just tell them about her own experiences with death?
So Christine Feehan is a crazy popular vampire author. She really helped revolutionize the genre. She really got a ton of interest. There's a lot to be said.
She was one of the OG vampire
Exactly.
writers.
Like, she's like Queen of Paranormal is one of her titles. One of the reasons she got into writing the Carpathian series specifically is because her son died. And she wanted a place to explore the loneliness she felt. She wanted to spend some time with this immortal race of beings that wouldn't die and were very powerful and were safe in that aspect. So I always try to keep that in mind when I'm reading about her. I'm probably going to say some things that are like the nicest about her.
Okay, that's
but
okay.
There are some very deep emotions that go into that series for her, and that influenced a lot of her plot and her characterization of just having lost her son.
Yeah. That's good. I think that really explains death. I mean, immortal beings, everybody being afraid of death.
Yeah.
They want to imagine this immortal race. It's kind of like the atheists in the back are standing up and clapping. But it's kind of a way to imagine God.
Yeah.
It's a way to imagine an afterlife. It's a way to imagine an everlife, something that will happen. It gives you hope about maybe the future. Maybe I'll turn into a vampire and I won't, quote unquote, have to die.
With me, it's like I don't have to worry about heaven or hell or what's after. I've stopped.
And I'll be able to collect all the money in the world.
Because, yeah, somehow vampires are always rich, which plays very much in fantasy, too.
Yeah. That would be nice.
I wish.
That would be very nice.
I went into the wrong profession, though.
What about blood? Let's talk about blood. Why do you think vampires have to suck blood? This is, I genuinely...
I think it's something about the life force.
Yeah.
I think because they literally need to take in what flourishes and embodies in us, the ability to survive. Because it's traditional, they can't eat food.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like, too, with if you picture, like, a dead body with fluid trickling out, it looks like blood.
It does, because it's dark.
It looks like blood. It's dark. It's gross. It probably smells really bad at that point. Ugh.
By the way, if you ever want to get rid of a body, just slice the belly open, stick some bricks in it. Don't stitch the belly back up. Throw it in a mangrove swamp.
Luckily, this is romance book discussion and not serial killer know-how. Please do not reference us.
We are not supporting murder in any which way. I'm just saying, don't become a vampire killer of Sacramento. But yeah, so
blood is sacred.
It is.
I mean, there's a lot of cultures that really uphold blood, and think about it even in Christianity. You drink the blood of Christ.
Yeah, that's true. The Mayans, the Aztec.
Yeah, I mean, how many cultures would like sacrifice things for the blood?
Yeah,
I think it's I think it's just an inner human part of us that is really attracted to blood and really horrified by blood at the same time.
Are you grossed out by blood?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, obviously I see it every month.
Yeah.
So it's not super useful of me to be grossed out by it.
Girls see more blood than boys.
Yeah. Thank you, Game of Thrones, for that one line. That's the only thing I appreciate about you. So I think with us, I don't have that kind of thing. I might be disgusted by other people's blood, I guess, because it's also your natural human impulse to be like, that's dangerous, get away.
I mean, it's also a taboo thing now to think of drinking blood, because it's not healthy. It's not safe.
It was never healthy or safe back then.
No, it wasn't. They just didn't.
They didn't know why. They just had a natural
aversion. It is interesting to think of the idea of the blood song. Isn't the song of the blood? Isn't that a thing from one of the books? Like their blood sings.
And Christine Feehan?
Yeah.
I think that's a common vampire thing too. That they're kind of like like
a siren call.
Yeah, like something about you is drawing me to you. So I've seen it with scent and I've seen it with blood.
Oh, that's a good way to lead into fated mates.
Ooh.
The idea. So a fated mate in a romance novel is this idea that there is soulmate. It's the one true person that you are meant to be with, that can save you, that can redeem you, that can rescue you. And I think of vampires.
Other half of your soul.
Your better half.
Oh,
especially with vampires. Vampires. So fated mates in vampires, you see it a lot where the hero, the vampire, will be either just out in general going around and he smells blood, and it'll be the blood of his one true mate, of his soulmate.
So that's a big thing with Kresley Cole. Once they smell the blood, that's theirs. Carpathians, they just kind of know it's you. That's a big thing. Or as soon as they see color with Carpathians.
Yeah.
So it does depend on the myth in the book.
So the one I just read, A Vampire Bewitched, he's really attracted to the heroine and all this sort of stuff, and then she offers her blood to him because he's like really injured and needs blood, kind of like Twilight.
Oh, okay.
And
True Blood does that.
Yeah, and he tastes the blood and he's like, "This is it. She's my fated mate."
She is.
Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting that in romance, especially, the soulmate, the fated mate, has been so tied together with vampires and supernatural in general, and that makes sense because the whole idea. I mean, it doesn't exist in real life. Sorry, I guess
it's
soulmate
also
believers.
it's a very romantic thing to think about because you
Yeah.
have this immortal being who literally could sleep with hundreds
Anybody.
of thousands of people.
Yeah.
But there's only one true love.
He's been waiting 1,000 years for you.
Love it.
I mean, my heart is cold and dead inside, but yeah, that gives me a little flutter.
Just a little.
Just a little, just a
Little
tad.
flutter.
Just enough that somebody could stake me.
All right.
I think that is an excellent jump-off point, though.
We didn't talk about sex.
Jackie, you're right!
S-E-X.
Yeah, so one of the things we forgot about with our dumb smart brains until we realized, hey, we need to think with our pea brains. There is definitely a big draw to vampires if we're just discussing their sexual lives. They've been around the block a few 100,000 times, let's say.
They have the skills to back it up, bro.
There is something very darkly sensual, sexual, any L's, really.
Yeah. It's just, they know what they're doing. And on top of that, there's usually like a blood exchange in sex that makes it extra special. Like the female orgasm in this is like, I mean, in most romances, it's the same way. But I think especially with vampire romances, it's not unusual to see depictions, mostly in movies and TV shows. I think True Blood did this, where they're like hovering above the bed.
Yeah. And just looking
Because
at
the
you.
sex is so good.
Oh, that too.
Yeah.
I was thinking like Edward Cullen creepiness of watching you when you sleep.
No, like literally they're like going at it and they like float above the bed.
Gotcha, yeah.
I think that happens.
Yeah, they do that. And True Blood, they literally destroy her bedroom at one point.
Oh, that's right. Oh my god, I like suck it.
I mean, usually the joke is that you're going to break your headboard. They broke her entire house, basically.
Yeah. And, yeah. So one last thing to talk about. Why are vampires male?
That is an excellent question. I thought of that myself preparing for this. And that's kind of says something to me because I have been reading vampires since middle school, probably, maybe high school. And I've never really stopped to be like, I just code them as male for
Just
some
automatically.
reason. Yeah, I don't even really think about it. And that's not to say there aren't female vampires out there. And I have read, I guess, some myths of female vampires, but it's very...
They're called different things.
Exactly. Like, they kind of get attributed to different myths and things. But, like, yeah, for some reason we just associate this very masculine kind of energy to a vampire, and it's usually the male vampire seducing the woman away. I think some of that does have to do with popular culture. If you think about how popular Dracula was, or remind me who the ugly one was? Bela Luigi?
Bela Luigi.
Yeah, he's male. I mean, there's a ton of...
Lugosi.
Lugosi.
Sorry. Bela
Yeah,
Lugosi.
Lugosi.
We're not the Luigi and Mario. So, I mean, even the story of the vampire isn't necessarily, classically speaking, just a male vampire.
Right.
A lot of the early stuff was actually about female lesbian vampires.
Really?
Which is really interesting. So Carmilla,
Right.
she was a lesbian vampire who hunted women as prey. So that's really interesting.
It's interesting they're always predators regardless. Like,
Yeah.
they didn't make the female vampire some weakling little baby thing that has to go be rescued by the...
I mean, I think... we talked about in the last episode how Victorians were very repressed, but there was still such a counterculture movement of like nipple rings and like bondage and the sex shops rising. And it's very much so the same thing with vampires, I think, where vampires were extremely counterculture. They're still extremely counterculture. They were linked with the Goths in the 80s and 90s.
That's
and
true.
it's still a thing.
I mean, people still kind of make fun of you, but now it's because of Twilight, not because vampires are like lame punk things.
Yeah, exactly. And largely, I think that vampires get linked with male predominantly because the word itself is a masculine noun.
Okay.
So vampire is masculine.
But you said that we don't know where vampire comes from.
We can kind of guess where it came from, but just strictly like language speaking, the IRE at the end is a masculine noun ending.
Okay.
So vampire itself is masculine. If we said vampiress, then we'd be like, oh yeah, that's feminine because the S.
Okay. So the name didn't help things.
No. What's in a name? A guy.
But hey, I know male romance readers are getting more popular. We
Yes.
actually found out that, what is it? It's like 20% from the RWA said that.
Yeah, I think so.
Granted, we can't trust everything the RWA says at the moment,
Yeah.
depending especially on when they did their research. But I am curious to see if female vampires will grow in popularity.
I hope so.
I wonder if what men would see in a vampire romance if they read those, or if they stick more with contemporary.
So think of True Blood with Jessica. That was her name, right? The redhead. And Sookie's brother. I loved that storyline.
Yeah.
That was like one of my favorite storylines. But yeah, largely even in True Blood.
But she wasn't like a powerful vampire, right?
She got to be.
Eventually, but I remember that one season when they had Violet, who was like genuinely a powerful vampire.
Yeah, and she tried to lure Jessica.
Yeah, she ended up going crazy.
Yeah.
You know, so it's I think we still have some of these issues maybe with powerful women. Is that too out there to say?
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
Well, I know that's like not, but am I digging too much?
I think too, because romance is largely written by women for women. I mean, now, like we said, it's changing, but it's still largely written by women.
Right.
And I think that we like to imagine. We'll always inject ourselves into the story as a writer.
That's true.
And we like to imagine ourselves being saved by the hero. And so we like to imagine ourselves being saved by the vampire or changing the vampire or like banging the vampire versus
that's one way to save yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, if we're writing a series, eventually down the line we're gonna write a female vampire because it injects something into the story.
And that is to say, there are female vampires out there.
Yes.
I mean, I've read a bunch of them. It's interesting to me, especially when I was preparing for this. That,
so disproportionate.
Yeah, it's very male. They're always the most powerful beings, and we're the ones kind of trying to catch up.
Also, I guess we could say babies. So,
yes! Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, a lot of the time, somehow they have babies.
Yeah.
But it always has to be with a human female. That's the only way they can have children. So that's the only way to perpetuate the family.
Yeah, because there is a myth, too, of half vampire creatures. I think it was like a Russian myth, the Damphars. I can't pronounce it. Thank you, Jackie, for not letting me talk
I got
badly.
you. I got you with weird languages.
So that's definitely a thing. And that reminds me, one personal reason I really like vampires, I really appreciate that they're usually the childless couples I want to read about.
Oh.
Because very much now it feels like, whatever book it is, there's always an epilogue when they have like 10,000
multiple children.
Yeah,
and then like, all their friends have children.
And I'm just like, it's nice for you guys. I'm not planning on having kids. It's fine. Like, I'm not saying I'm not going to read a book because they're going to have children. And I still read like pregnancy books and it's like accidental kids, and that's still enjoyable. But it would be nice to see a happy couple that's just going about their lives child-free.
Living somewhat immortally.
Yeah.
Just, themselves, their riches, a nice castle or two.
If I was married to a vampire, we would not have kids. I would make him have a giant pool full of jewels I get to swim in. We would travel all over the place.
I feel like we're telling a lot about ourselves with this. Whoops. Yeah. But yeah, that's pretty much vampires are awesome, even though it's mostly men.
Very sensual, very dark, it just
sexy.
Speaks to something in us, which is still very interesting to me. And I think it's something we're going to explore as we go through this podcast, because obviously romance will do that for everything. Mm-hmm. There is something that speaks to you in every kind of genre of romance.
Yeah.
And I guess it looks like vampires will live to rise again.
They will always be there.
You can't keep them in the coffin.
Forever and ever.
Right now, do you have any theories on why they're not popular right now? Because it did kind of die down.
Twilight.
Do you think so? There was too much Twilight?
I think Twilight got so popular that it just left burnt out. Everybody burnt out. And especially because it was such a hyperbole of some vampiric traits that I think people got sick of it.
I will say, too, I have seen vampires, but within universes
Yeah.
of multiple supernatural beings.
So I think now it's really starting to get popular as shifters. So a shifter,
Those are fun.
A shifter is pretty much like a werewolf is a shifter. It's something that changes from a human form into another creature type form.
Werewolves are the traditional, but we've had werepanthers.
Dragons.
Oh, the dragons are fun.
Dragons are really
Dragons
popular
are cool.
right now.
Bears.
Nora is actually coming out with a dragon. Something with a dragon. It's got a dragon on the cover. I'm excited.
Oh boy.
But I think that vampires will come back. It's the same with a lot of tropes that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, they always come back eventually. Something will happen, and we want a immortal lover to go and beat somebody up for us.
Exactly. Who knows? Maybe after coronavirus,
Thank you, Cardi.
we'll need some more.
But there is still so much to talk about when it comes to vampires.
Yes.
But next episode, we are going to dive deep into Christine Fian and Twilight to discuss those things.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening.
Fangs.
And we can't wait to see you next time.
All right, gang. Bye.
Thanks so much. Keep raging.